Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the Scrutiny Committee on Thursday, the 6th of June 2024 from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 6:30 p.m. I'm Councillor Caroline Brooke, chairperson of this committee, and just some housekeeping before we begin. This meeting is live streamed and audio recorded and will be available on the Council's YouTube channel. Can everyone ensure that your mobiles are switched off or on silent, please? And in the unlikely event of a fire, we will evacuate the building if the fire alarm sounds and follow instructions given to us by our team. I'd like to welcome Councillor Horrell and Councillor Lee this evening, who've registered to speak on some of the agenda items, and I will invite you forward when it's time to make your contribution. And so turning to the agenda, do we have any apologies tonight, Matthew?
Good evening, Chair members. No apologies. Thank you. Councillor Reach has just said he's at the mercy of South Western Railway at the moment, and will be joining us as soon as a 40-minute late train allows.
Thank you, Councillor Peck. Much appreciated. Aside from that, we shall continue. Does anyone have any declarations of interest? Councillor Wallace?
Yeah, I think I've got to make a declaration as a county council member. And I don't know the right words, but thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Do we have any other declarations? No? Okay. So first of all, the first item of business is to appoint a vice chairperson for the municipal year 2024-25. I'd like to call for nominations and seconders, if I may. I'd like to nominate Councillor Bolton. Councillor Atchwell?
I'd nominate Councillor Wallace.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that?
Yes.
You can second yourself. Councillor Wallace, you haven't put your hand up. Is that something you'd be wanting to do or not wanting to do?
Yeah, I'm happy to be nominated as deputy.
Then we shall have a vote. Those for Councillor Bolton? Me and you? And those for Councillor Wallace? Councillor Wallace, you have to join me at the top table. So, welcome to Deputy Chairing Councillor Wallace. So announcements this evening. It's unusual to hold a meeting during the pre-election period, but this meeting is being held tonight because there's urgent matters that still require a decision by Cabinet or the paper that is travelling onwards to Council. Similarly, the appointments need to be made by this committee and are included in this paper this evening. And so that the representatives can step into those roles and sit on the meetings before they're called. However, things are subject to change during this time, and tonight's agenda has had to be adjusted. Officers have advised of a need to withdraw the presentation regarding the nutrient mitigation project. As is well known, there is a national funding available to address the issue of nutrient neutrality. A paper on this matter was scheduled for the push meeting on the 8th of July, which would have required papers to be published during the pre-election period. This meeting has now been rescheduled until later in July. So since the push meeting is delayed, the paper to Cabinet is no longer urgent and an immediate decision is no longer necessary. Therefore, it's not appropriate or necessary for this committee to discuss this matter this evening. Also, under announcements, I'd just like to say thank you all who attended the CFGI education training that we had. I think it was incredibly useful. So thank you to all involved in arranging that. And I forget the name of the lady who, Camilla. And I'd like our thanks recorded to Camilla for an excellent training session that I think will be really beneficial in the coming year. So turning to item 5, minutes of the meeting on 6th of March 2024. Can these be agreed as a true record of what happened on the evening? Agreed. Thank you very much. We're now on item 6, public participation, and just to confirm, speaking, we have item 8, procurement of waste and recycling vehicles. We have councillors Horrell and Lee, who've both asked to speak after the presentation. On item 9, we have appointments of external bodies. Councillor Horrell, you're going to speak on that. And item 10, we have the annual scrutiny report, and Councillor Lee is to speak on that one. So moving to item 8, as we've withdrawn the nutrient mitigation project. So this is about the procurement of waste and recycling collection vehicles update. There is a recommendation that we as the scrutiny, I have requested this paper to come this evening. So I would like to welcome our officers and members we have in the room. So we have Councillor Cutler and Councillor Lerney, so thank you for joining us. The officers we have Andy Hickman, Campbell Williams, Strategic Director Simon Hendy, and as always, our Chief Exec Laura Taylor. We will have a presentation, and then I will call forwards Councillors Horrell and Councillors Lee to speak, and then we are free to ask questions. Copies of the slides have been placed on our tables, should we wish to follow them through. So I shall move to Councillor Lerney to introduce first. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Hendy would like a word before we begin.
Yes, if I may, Chair, thank you. Given the pre-election period, members could be forgiven for asking why this item is urgent and critical to be considered, and I think really there are two reasons for that. Firstly, members will be aware in February, Cabinet considered a report on the introduction of food waste service and asked officers to go away and progress the introduction of that service, looking for to pursue the lowest carbon viable option, and then specifically looking at the procurement of vehicles to support that service. Secondly, members are also aware from that report that there is a government timescale for implementation of the food waste service of April 2026, and therefore the procurement of the vehicles need to be achieved in a timely manner to be able to achieve that timescale, and therefore a decision needs to be made quickly, hence report going to this Cabinet to enable that procurement to take place. Moreover, it needs to be recognised that Winchester City Council, along with all the other local waste collection authorities in the country, will be looking to procure vehicles. Therefore, it's important that we place the council in a strong position to procure the vehicles, and we don't prejudice the ability to be at the mercy of the market and a lot of local authorities chasing a restricted supply of vehicles. Thus, it's important we get a decision on which vehicles to procure as early as possible. So that's the reasons we believe the item is urgent and critical. I'll leave it there and pass over to Councillor Lerney.
Thank you, Mr. Hendy. I will keep this introduction brief, as we do have Campbell Williams, our service lead for environmental services, to give the presentation, and I don't want to steal all his thunder. The aim of this administration has been to expand the range of materials recyclable at the curbside. As soon as we can do so in a financially prudent and practical way. This has put us in a better place than most councils not already doing so to hit the requirement in the Environment Act 2021 to provide a food waste service by the end of March 2026. As we have consulted widely on our waste strategy and received responses from thousands of our residents, we've worked with BIFA on our truck requirements and rounds. We've brought experts in to carry out technical studies and research, and we have put budget in place. But as Mr. Hendy said, there is the danger of us ending up in a long queue of councils ordering new vehicles. It is essential that we don't lose impetus on this, so we do need to make the decisions necessary to carry out the procurement of vehicles for the new service. But it will be in the autumn that we look at the full details of how we're going to introduce the service, how we're going to deal with issues such as, flats and difficult to reach areas. So there will be plenty of opportunity for members to be involved in some of those decisions going forward. Right now, however, we are discussing the procurement of the vehicles, and I welcome the opportunity for scrutiny to comment and ask questions prior to Cabinet taking a final decision to move forward. So I will hand over to Campbell.
Thank you, Councillor Laney. Thank you, Chair. Yes, my name's Campbell Williams. I'm Service Lead for Environmental Services. I've got about 10 slides I'm going to talk through, so hopefully it won't take too long, and then as we said, there'll be opportunity for questions. So just move on to the first slide. So just as a reminder, and Simon's mentioned this, if you go back to February, the Cabinet paper in February agreed that we would seek to introduce a food waste collection across Winchester with Biffa as our current contractor for food waste, and that would include the provision of food waste vehicles. And secondly, that we would pursue the current lowest carbon viable option as a priority for the service delivery, which is in line with the Council's carbon neutrality aspirations. So next slide, please. So I think it's just because we don't have one at the moment, it's probably worth giving a few bits of information about how and what a food waste service is. So so it's not all just death by PowerPoint. I've got a couple of props just to show you what we would intend to do, and this is common to almost every household across the country which will be getting this. You would get a small kitchen caddy which goes in your kitchen, and that's where you store food waste scraps, and then that would go out to a larger, probably about 23 litres curbside bin, which you can see, and after the meeting you can come and have a look at this. This is a type of example you'd get. This lid is lockable, so it's animal proof, so stops rats or badgers or foxes getting in, and when we actually go through this, it would have the appropriate logos on the side so you know where it came from. And these would be collected from your curbside once a week, at the same time as your other alternate weekly collections happen. So if you put out the residual bin, you'd also put out your food waste bin. If you put out your recycling bin, you'd also put out your food waste bin. If you look at what we collect at the moment in our residual waste, about a third of our residual waste in Winchester and across Hampshire is actually food waste. And that falls into two main categories. There is unavoidable food waste, things like chicken carcasses or fish bones, which you can't really do too much with. And the second type is food waste, which you can not produce in the first place, like leftover bread or bits of salad which have gone mouldy. And it's about, of the 25–30% of food waste in our residual bins, about half of that is unavoidable types and about half of that is avoidable. So that goes in one of these bins, and as I said, it would be collected on the same rounds, and when it's collected, it would then go to one of our transfer stations where we drop it off. The County Council, as the Waste Disposal Authority, would bulk it up into larger vehicles and take it to an anaerobic digestion facility, where there is currently enough capacity in Hampshire for that to happen, and it would go off to generate energy and soil improver, which is good use for it. And this happens in a lot of other authorities across the country, and at the moment there are 3 authorities in Hampshire which do this to a greater or lesser degree. So the closest one is Eastleigh, but Portsmouth and Rushmore also do this as well. So next slide, please. Thank you. And one of the reasons for doing this, and this is why the government is mandating this for all authorities in England by the 1st of April 2026, is that if you take the food waste currently mixed in with a residual bin, you save a significant amount of carbon equivalent, and you reduce a whole load of waste which otherwise go to final disposal. In Hampshire's case, it goes to incineration. So based upon our estimates, it's probably about 1,900 tonnes of carbon equivalent in Winchester per year, which is quite a large contribution. And as you can imagine, in order to collect that, you'll need a number of vehicles to do that. And we've done quite a bit of work with Biffa, who's our waste contractor, and with some consultants which are unrelated to Biffa. And because it's such a high value investment, you know, we want to make sure we get the right figure. And we've come up with, you need in total 9 food waste trucks, which are 12-tonne vehicles. and they're effectively just waste trucks, but a bit smaller. Our normal waste trucks, which you see around the street, are 26-ton capacity. So these ones are much smaller vehicles. What we want to do is look at, and what we've done, and this what this discussion takes us on through, is we want to have a reliable service which enables people to recycle as much food waste as possible at the lowest carbon output. So we need to consider what our vehicle choices are for those 9-12-ton vehicles which we need. So just moving on. So one of the things we've looked at in some depth is the use of electric vehicles for food waste. If you look at electric refuse collection vehicles, the 26-ton ones, there's actually quite a lot of those in operation and have been in operation for a long time around the country. But if you look at electric food waste vehicles, there are very, very few of those which are in operation at the moment across the country on a consistent basis, and even less which are in operation in areas like ours. So they're very untrialed and unused. There's also issues that if you look at electric refuse collection vehicles, they are now available from manufacturers who manufacture the whole of the vehicle and offer a service and reliability and maintenance program, whereas electric food waste vehicles are bits of chassis and bits of electric vehicle and bits of tipper construction which come from different manufacturers. So it's very difficult actually to say with any honesty that we should buy electric vehicles because of those potential reliability issues. And what we want to do is have the biggest impact on food waste that we can by collecting as much as we can in a reliable way. And from my experience, I know if we miss collections, the residents are on the phone and they want them collected, so we want this to be reliable. Whereas diesel vehicles, which can run on hydro-treated vegetable oil, which is what HVO stands for, are reliable, well tested, and have a competitive supplier market, and are also, there's evidence about how they get maintained and the program that goes through that. The other thing we've had to look at in terms of making a choice of vehicles is the depot infrastructure. So most of you will know we've got our depot out towards the leisure centre, where all our waste trucks and staff are kept at the moment, and we've looked at what electrical supply there is available at the moment on that depot, and at the moment, without significant investment, there is capacity to charge small 4 food waste trucks, and that's the maximum we could do, and we'd need to spend a significant amount of money to get more electric vehicles charged there, and that would need a substation and work with the network distributor to enable that to happen. And that infrastructure wouldn't be in place in order to confirm we could run electric vehicles out of there. So the depot infrastructure is quite difficult. So then you go on to the next page, if that's all right. So if we look at how we choose vehicles, if you use a diesel vehicle and you run it on hydro-treated vegetable oil, that reduces CO2 emissions by over 90%. That does assume you are managing to assess and get the right HVO. You don't want to be getting HVO which is not accredited and not supported by the right documentation. But actually, you can see that if we run 9 food waste vehicles on diesel compared to on HVO, you almost remove entirely the carbon equivalent that is produced. The difficulty is removing the very last bit. That last 6% is extremely costly, because whilst electric vehicles for food waste are not necessarily proven to be reliable, and we don't have the infrastructure for them in terms of the electricity, they're also over twice as expensive based upon the work we've done with the existing suppliers. The other problem we have with electric vehicles is we're not sure about the capacity of the vehicles to deliver all the routes that we have in Winchester. So whilst it might be okay for an electric vehicle to travel around central Winchester collecting food waste, actually on a Friday they're all going to be out in Waterlooville and Whiteley, and they might not get there and back, whereas we know a diesel vehicle running on HVO can do that. So that makes it quite difficult. What we do know is, as has been said, all local authorities are looking at this, and over time the electric vehicle market is expected to mature and the range improve, very similar to how it has done with the full-size 26-ton refuse collection vehicles. So next slide, please. So we looked at that in terms of food waste vehicles. One of the interesting things is that actually we've got an alternative opportunity to use electricity and reduce our carbon footprint. And one of the things which we're going to have to do with food waste is to look at how we collect the materials. As you can imagine, collecting these from 55,000 households, including communal properties, requires a bit of work. And so we're working with BIFA to do a full reroute. And actually, if we do that, because we will optimise the travel and transport, that will see probably about a 13% reduction in mileage, because we'll have shorter routes and have a better system in place. And that's being done in order to make those efficiencies and make the rounds more resilient, but also because we've now got about 58,000 households compared to when we started working with BIFA, and we had about 55,000 households. So there's been an increase in the number of households. So because of that, the rounds have become unbalanced. Because of that, we need another refuse collection vehicle because of the amount of waste that's being produced. And actually, that additional refuse collection vehicle could be an electric refuse collection vehicle. And the benefits of that are that's been around for a lot longer, and they're proven to be reliable, and they have individual manufacturers who can sell you the whole package and maintain the whole package. And what that would give us is an understanding of how electric vehicles work in Winchester. So how far can they go? How do they cope with the hills which are in Winchester? How do they cope with the trips to Otterbourne to go to the tipping facilities? And that's a relatively low cost option to the council to learn quite a lot of information. So that would be whilst it says pilot there, that would be a fully operational electric vehicle which we would learn from, and we'd have that until the end of the current contract. And if we learn from that and we can then develop the infrastructure, that gives us an opportunity to develop a next phase with potentially more electric vehicles when we move into the next contract where we have to re-vehicle our fleet. So next page, please. So just in a summary of what we've done. So since February's Cabinet decision, so we've looked at and assessed the finance, carbon reduction, depot infrastructure, the availability and reliability of vehicle options, and we've come to the conclusion that 9 12-ton vehicles powered with hydrotreated vegetable oil offers the best value for money, the lowest carbon, most reliable option to start a new service and have the most impact on removing CO2 from our services. We've also concluded that we could be able to source a relatively low cost electric 26-ton refuse collection vehicle to work through how we manage that in the district as we prepare to transition to zero carbon. And we've started assessing the process to prepare the depot for a full electric vehicle fleet, and to get that in the system. So that's quite a lot of work done. And as Councillor Lerny said and Mr. Hendy said, the next steps are quite interesting, because we're not the only authority doing that, and that's why we're here today. So we've got a decision with Cabinet on the 19th of June. We are currently engaging with the government on the timing and decision of funding. So the food waste service is a new burden, and the government is looking to fund that. And there are a number of different funding outcomes which we're waiting on. The non-municipal household waste, so places like the shops on Winchester High Street or the pubs in Alresford, for example, are also required to start food waste collections, which is going to be quite interesting. And what's really interesting is the current vehicle lead-in time for vehicles is 8 months to a year. That's likely to extend outwards, because all local authorities in England who currently don't run a food waste service are going to be looking to buy a number of food waste vehicles, and there is only so much vehicle manufacturing capacity in the UK to manage that. And the government has mandated that by April 2026 all food waste collection should be in place. And what we want to do really is make sure that we're not at the back of the queue waiting for food waste vehicles to come, which others might find themselves in that position. So what I wanted to just finish with is a couple of slides which set out how this fits into the overall picture of where we are and what we've done. So as Councillor Lerny said, what we've been doing as a council for a while is improving the number of facilities and materials that residents can collect at the curbside. So, you know, we have introduced battery and small electrical weekly collections. The garden waste service in the brown bins starting in 2021. We introduced curbside glass in 2019, and that's seen the recycling rate go up to about 40% at the moment. And there are a number of major activities which the government is introducing. So we've got a thing called simpler recycling, which we're working with the county council on the introduction of pots, tubs, trays and cartons into the recycling mix, and the government's target is for that to be in place across Winchester and England by the end of 2026. The government is also introducing extended producer responsibility, where manufacturers such as Tesco or Amazon will be paying for the packaging that residents produce. And the third one is a deposit return scheme, where a deposit of around 20p probably will be put on all non-glass drinks containers to take those through the system, to encourage people not to litter them and to make sure that they will get recycled. And so in the next 2 or 3 years, there are lots of financial dates and dates that the government is setting us. And if you move to the next slide, the reason for that is linked to national programmes where we've got a target to get to a 65% recycling rate for municipal waste by 2035, heading towards an aspiration of zero avoidable waste by 2050. And all of that follows on as part of the Environment Act, which is linked to making the whole country more carbon efficient. So there's a whole amount of stuff on here. I think one of the points I'm trying to get across is this is potentially one of the first bits of a programme of change. So food waste would start in 2026, but also we should see pots, tubs, trays and cartons start. We should see a deposit return scheme start, and you should see places like Tesco, Amazon, Marks and Spencer's slowly thinking about how they change their packaging, and you will see different types of packaging in your waste. So a whole amount going on, and the reason for doing this is to start the process of buying the food waste trucks that we need, and we've done the work to get to. So that's the last slide that I've got. Happy to answer any questions or take any points and go from there.
Thank you. Before we go to questions, Councillor Bottom, I'd like to invite the public participation. Councillor Horrell, would you like to come forward?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak after the presentation. I'm not quite sure why we couldn't have had the presentation before tonight, so I apologise if I'm slightly stumbling through some of the points that I would perhaps have longer to consider if we'd seen it before. A couple of questions just to clarify, Campbell, in terms of your presentation. I believe you said that the food waste will go to AD plants in Hampshire, so that we're not creating great journeys for what we're collecting and Hampshire processing, but that would be good just to reiterate that. Also, you talked about, obviously, this is going alongside existing collections. Does that have any impact on any of the current services that we have? You know, batteries, small electricals, is everything just going to, this is going to be incremental, just to clarify, because those other services are very well received, we know from our residents, that we're now offering. In terms of the recommendation, how long what's the lifetime essentially of the vehicles that you're recommending? So you're suggesting that there are 12. What is the lifetime? Given that this is a moving market, and obviously things will evolve, and there will be improvements. You also talked about infrastructure at the depot, or yet today I was in a meeting where I was told we were disposing of the depot. So when we talk about the depot, where is that? And also the issue of the infrastructure, which is sort of a thorny element. If we ever want to get to EV, how do we solve that? What is the project? And you've said here in your document that you've had consultants looking at some of that, so it would be good to understand what that will bring for us. Also, you mentioned round changes. I think some of us have lived through round changes. It makes everyone very nervous. That is probably the right thing to do. I'm not questioning the validity of that, but just to understand how we tackle that and the comms and when, because it makes people very nervous, as you'll know, and your inbox, I'm sure, will reflect when anything doesn't quite go according to plan. But given the number of houses that we're having in the district, you've already said we've got several thousand more since we had the initial contract with Biffa, which I remember well, but obviously we are scheduled in the planned period to build many thousands more, and just to understand, have we built in that capacity and in terms of the match to what we're anticipating the next local plan will bring. And then the sort of thorny question, given that this is about purchase, and as we've all, I think, agreed the strategic intent of doing this, is what is the cost that you're going to be putting into the cabinet paper on the 19th of June, that you're asking the council to sign off on, for your recommended mix of vehicles of the HVOs and the electric test. And then finally on that, given that we had such a fantastic response to the consultation on waste and some of the improvements, although this will come, everyone will be asking, what about pots, trays and tubs? I was asked about it in a parish council meeting only yesterday. When is that happening? So how are we just going to, which is slightly a tangent to buying the vehicles, but it will come up, I'm sure. What is the comms to advise our residents about where we are on that journey, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. I will invite Councillor Lee to speak, and then we'll address the questions collectively, if that's okay. Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak, and rapidly adjusting my notes as I hadn't seen these slides either. Firstly, fantastic news to learn about the EV trial and to learn from what sounds like an exciting pilot. Obviously, we can also piggyback on the rollout of the state-of-the-art EV fleet in Manchester, where there's the biggest commitment to electric vehicles, highlighting the bigger benefits of electric refuge vehicles for collection. So I guess there are other areas where we can learn from. My consideration of your slide 8, you talk about assessed finance and carbon reduction costs. I don't see any consideration to the nature emergency declaration resolutions. You know, the entire lifespan of our vehicles produces greenhouse gases, has impacts on nature and us from production to the eventual disposal. So I just wonder whether there is some consideration that might be given to that. And then the next thought and question I have based on what you said was, what flexibility will be included in the procurement contract or agreement? We know that there's a rapid change in technology. The environmental crises are moving afoot, as you know, and I know from a personal experience that, you know, my electric vehicle I hire, I don't buy, because I'm sure as eggs are eggs, the technology is going to change. And I'm thinking about old or new Moore's law, you know, components on single chips double every 2 years. So are we going to be locked into something and then find we've got stranded assets? And for me, that would be a real concern. So is that in a sort of a risk register of some sort? The HVO is more expensive than diesel and the price is volatile. So will our procurement process for the new vehicles include maybe a bulk buy to future-proof and hedge against market instability, future hikes in taxation on the fuel, and obviously to avoid the externalized environmental risks? And if you look at the 2022 International Council on Clean Transport study, it indicated that there might not be a guaranteed supply of non-palm oil HVO, which then obviously means that the facts that only 8% of all verified renewable fuel supplied in the UK is produced from UK origin feedstocks, according to latest government statistics. So there's a risk that we could be contributing, as other nations do the same as what we're doing, to the and driving the expansion of palm oil cultivation in Southeast Asia with endemic deforestation and peat destruction and so on. So I think those really are my key questions. You know, really, yeah, is there a risk register based on some of the things I've just said? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Mr. Williams, would you like to address some of those points? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so I was writing those down. So if I miss anything while I've gone through this, do let me know afterwards. So a couple of points of clarity from Councillor Horrell. So my understanding at the moment from discussions with Hampshire County Council is that there is the AD capacity in Hampshire to enable the food waste we produce in Winchester to be treated in Hampshire without it having to leave the county. So that's what they've said. And the second bit is it shouldn't have any impact. You might asked about the impact on the current service. It shouldn't have any impact on the current service. We are going to do some engagement with residents, and I'll talk about that in a bit later on, because if you're on an assisted collection, or if you're in a communal property, or if you live in a site close to the top of steps, you will have an extra bin, which we'll have to work through with residents to find out the best way of getting those collected from everybody. And we can learn from other people who have done this, and we can also learn from the residents who we have got their contact details from the engagement we did last time. So shouldn't have any major impact on the service. We won't be stopping anything else that we do at the moment. So the lifetime of the vehicles, all the vehicles we'll be looking to buy, and this relates a little bit about what Councillor Lee mentioned as well, we'd be looking to buy those with a lifetime of about 8 years, and that's what most waste trucks are depreciated over by people who buy them, and at the end of 8 years they have a residual value, and they can be disposed of appropriately, or recycled or repurposed. One of the interesting things which we will learn from other people is that electric vehicles are potentially have a larger resale value because they have less moving parts than diesel vehicles. So that's one of the things that you are potentially able to repurpose an electric vehicle, which you can't necessarily do with a diesel vehicle, and that's part of what we want to work and learn through. Right. So the infrastructure at the depot, we're working with a number of consultants and are in contact with I think Scottish and Southern Electricity, who are the network distributor in that area, to look at how much capacity there is there and what we need to do to get that. And we will have to make some decisions, and this is potentially something that comes back to Cabinet in the future, about making investments in infrastructure now, because again there's a queue to get access to available electricity, and if you don't get in the front of the queue, you might find that Stagecoach gets it, or the hospital gets it, or Burger King on the motorway gets it. So we've got to look at how we do that. You're also absolutely right, Councillor Horrell. Round changes have the potential not to go smoothly. I've got a series of meetings with our communications team and with BIFA. I've got another one tomorrow morning to work that through, so that we make sure that calendars are correct, they're circulated, we use the right form of communication with people, such as social media and other routes for people who don't use social media, so that when the round changes, they aren't surprised by it. BIFA, and I think one of the advantages we have of working with BIFA is that they do this regularly, and so they have engaged one of their staff who does this more or less full time, and that person is really good. Happens to live in Winchester, so knows the area really well, which is quite helpful. So she will be affected by it. So hopefully it'll go really smoothly. But I think the other thing which I mentioned about BIFA having a lot of experience in this. One of Councillor Lee's questions is about learning from other places, such as Manchester, who have a fleet of electric vehicles. Those are run by BIFA, who have a lot of experience which we can share and learn from. So I think very much one of the advantages is having BIFA as a contractor is we can learn from them on how to reroute things and how to use electric vehicles, because they have a lot of experience. The other I've mentioned this just now is we did a really engagement with 8,500 people responded last year. I'm trying to think when it was last year, and what we want to do is really get the service users involved in designing how we give these out and how we then introduce pots, tubs, trays and cartons when we do, so we communicate that appropriately. What's going to be really interesting is to learn what the government is going to do, because at the same time as introducing pots, tubs and trays, for example, on the diagram of when it's going to happen, in there are timelines when all the labelling on products is going to become consistent. So if you look on a bag of Quavers at the moment, for example, it says recycle in store, and the logo is the same as a bottle of Coke which says recycle at home on it, and it's very difficult to tell them apart. So as the government's logos become confirmed and changed, we should be able to translate that to something which the Winchester residents should be able to understand and really benefit from. I think one further question was, what's the cost of these vehicles? So in terms of the actual vehicles plus the spares which we'll use, it's about 1.3 million. In terms of capital investment, and one of the joys at the moment is working with DEFRA, and they are investing some money in this. So they have given us an indication of how much money they're going to give us. We're challenging some of that, as a lot of local authorities are, but the total cost of those is about £1.3 million, which is about, I think, £135,000 per vehicle. So I think that's covered all your questions. Oh, sorry, there was another one you asked about the future capacity of rounds. That's it. So one of the things that BIFA have done is, and we've worked with them to do this and provided the information, is they know how many houses there are now. Our planning team know where houses are going to be located in the future. So the rounds which are being developed now have the capacity inbuilt for the future development. So, for example, where there may be a lot of development in the southern part of Winchester, Whiteley, Southwark, Waterlooville, those sorts of areas, there is capacity being built in for those, so that in 3-4 years' time, the rounds are still resilient and the crews aren't having to finish at 6 o'clock in the evening, which is a difficult concept. Yeah, and the other thing we're working with on part of that capacity is about making sure that when we introduce pots, tubs, trays and cartons, we don't have to do a reroute again. So we're doing this, I'm really hopeful we're doing this once at the start of this process. We're doing it for food waste, for pots, tubs and trays, for the deposit return scheme, and we don't have to do it again. That's the intention.
One moment, Campbell, I'm just going to pause you. Councillor Loney wanted to come in here. Councillor Loney.
Thank you. There were a couple of other questions which were raised, particularly around the depot and the EV infrastructure. While we are disposing of the old depot site, the depot we're talking about in this case is the existing Biffa depot. We do need extra space for the extra vehicles, and we're looking at how we can provide that on our existing estate. But that is something, that is a matter that we do need to deal with, a question that needs answering before we come to final decisions about how we manage the service, which isn't quite the same as this decision around how many vehicles we need. I think the other thing to say about pots, tubs and trays is that the instant county have the infrastructure to be able to deal with it and sort them out through the recycling process. We can introduce that, you know, effectively immediately. We just need to tell residents that they can now start doing it. Unfortunately, it is taking quite a long time for county to make decisions about the infrastructure that they believe they need. And one of the things we will need to consider later in the year is that county will be telling us how we do need to recycle effectively, which bins we're going to need, and that will be something that we'll have to deal with as part of the Future of Waste project.
Councillor Loney, are you able to address the question that Councillor Horrell asked about the depot and where that will be situated at all?
It's at the existing. We anticipate the depot being at the existing depot site. Currently, ID Verdi are also based in space there, so there is potentially additional capacity, but clearly that creates a knock-on effect as to where our grounds management vehicles go.
So we're still planning on one central depot and okay. I was just thinking for future, if we were thinking about infrastructure and how EV vehicles perhaps in future could reach some of the further down south locations, maybe it would be sensible to have a secondary site.
Yeah, actually that is a further question which is, I think, is worth responding to. We have had a study done on the available infrastructure down at the Bar End area, which currently is nowhere near the capacity we need just for if we wanted to electrify our waste vehicles. In addition, we also have the Stagecoach depot down there, so it would make sense for us to work together to look at a kind of mass electrification project. We are working on a local area energy plan, which will look at the potential for additional electrification in the wider district. And as you say, it may well be that at some point, when we look at where we can manage to deliver decent amounts of power, that we might want to distribute some of our facilities.
Thank you, Councillor Lanning. Campbell.
So yeah, if that covers all of Councillor Horrell's points, I had a couple of responses to Councillor Lee. I think your first point was it's really exciting to hear about, you know, having an electric refuse collection vehicle, because we'll be able to learn from how we use that. And I think that's really important, because as you say, Manchester have done that, and there's an increasing number of places that do that, and that will enable us to learn about the lifespan of these vehicles, how we manage them, because we have currently got 17 we've currently got 17 diesel refuse collection vehicles, which are 26 tonnes, and don't do a very good mileage to the gallon ratio at all. They really don't. If we can learn about those, that's potentially where the big saving comes in the long term, and that's something we're really aspiring to do. And we know that our current contract, which started in February 2021, finishes in February 2029. And potentially learning from that single RCV enables us to make some decisions about A, the infrastructure, but B, what vehicles we get in February 2029 to make sure we've got the biggest impact that we have got. In the meantime, it's really important also that we use hydro-treated vegetable oil, which comes from a sustainable source and is properly accredited. And again, this is one of the advantages of working with BIFA, because they do have a bulk buying power, and they do have a significant amount of expertise in this. So when they were looking at where to get the fuel for us from this, they were able to source a number of suppliers, all who had the right accreditation, and we were able to have an input into which supplier we chose, so that the accreditation met the levels that we needed, but also that BIFA want to operate under, because sustainability is a big part from them. So, and you are right, there is only a limited amount of that. So we need to make sure that we're at the front of the queue when we're working with people who have good contacts in that area, to make sure we get accredited material. So I think that's really important for us. And I think what we're looking at doing with the single electric RCV is giving us as much flexibility as possible in the future to go forward and make some really big strategic decisions about electric vehicles in a way that we'll learn from what we have at the moment. And I think that's answered all your questions.
There was a question about flexibility of the procurement contract, and another one about there seems to be no mention of the impact on the nature emergency declaration. I'm not sure if they're more for Councillor Lerney.
We'll pick that up when we do produce the final paper on that. I think at the moment we think those impacts are broadly similar, as long as we are careful about our sources of HVO, because essentially the trucks will be identical whatever the power source is. But clearly that is something that we need to consider in all of our council papers going forward, and that is a commitment that we've made.
Thank you, Councillor Lerney. Is there any comment on the flexibility of the contract? Or
so I think we are almost halfway through the contract with BIFA. So I think what we're doing is putting ourselves in a position where at the end of the contract in February 2029, we've got the opportunity to introduce some more electric refuse collection vehicles and potentially make some further changes. But what we need to do, I think, to start off with, is gain some experience in electrification of vehicles, learn how they operate, and then start introducing those as we go forward.
Just to add to that, it is possible to vary the contract through deed of variations, which we'll need to do for the food waste service anyway. So you can make further changes. The only, obviously, an important consideration is the cost of that. I mean, the electric RCV we're getting for this, we're calling it a pilot, but it will actually be running one of the rounds. That's a reasonable cost to us, because under the contract, BIFA have to supply new vehicles for additional houses. We built that into the contract. The only additional cost to us is the electric vehicle element, because the contract says a vehicle, we're saying an electric vehicle, so it's a reasonable cost to us. But there is provision in there to make variations if we can afford it, and if we decide we can introduce more electric RCVs over the next 4 years, if we can find the power supply and find the funding to do that, and based on how it works with this one round, which we will be introducing towards the end of the year.
thank you, Mr. Hickman, much appreciated. Right, so that's all of the questions covered off, I believe, from our public participation. So coming to the room, Councillor Bolton, you had your hand up first.
I did, and thanks for answering those questions, because I think you've covered most of them. I suppose the only point of clarification for me, because I'm still learning on these things, is so the decision that's needed to be taken on the 19th is to spend 1.3 million, and then that enables you to get on and enter into tender processes and such like. Okay, I understand.
Okay. Right. Councillor Clear, you were next.
Thank you. May I just ask, your kitchen caddies, Campbell, is there a cost to households? Do they purchase these or do we just give them out to the households? Thank you.
I don't think actually we've made a decision on that yet, but I think the intention is they're provided to householders free of charge. And that's one of the things which the government has provided funding for. So the intention at the moment, my intention is they'd be free of charge, as would be the bigger ones.
Thank you. Councillor Laming?
Thank you. Awesome. Several questions here. When we look at these electric vehicles, I think it was North Lincolnshire had quite a lot of success with vehicles, waste collection vehicles, which have electric rams, and they have solar panels on the top, which would greatly reduce the fuel consumption. Have you looked into that?
I think one of the things, yeah, not sure we looked at solar panels on the roof of the vehicles. What we've got at the moment is solar panels on the roof of the depot the vehicles sit in, and on the car park next door, which has some batteries in it.
Yeah.
So
these ones are actually on top of the vehicles, and they supplement the energy of the vehicle and increase.
Sorry, I think something we can look at, but I can see Councillor Lenny was also keen to.
Yes, please, Councillor Nanny.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons why it's a problem if we go for electric food waste vehicles, because we have only identified one potential.
It's not an electric vehicle. It's a conventional vehicle with solar panels, which aids the electric drive for the rams.
Right.
On it.
So essentially, what you're saying is it's a hybrid vehicle.
Yeah.
Right. Well, certainly that's something that we can have a look at as part of the procurement, because clearly energy efficiency will come into play.
And then have we looked at the diesel hydro mix engines? If you mix hydrogen in with the diesel, you get a much better result for your NOx and CO2 than you would do using hydro.
Yeah, I think we've looked at a number of options with Biffa as our contractor, and one of those was looking at hydrogen, not necessarily mixed with diesel, and I think we came to the conclusion that HVO was the best option because of the cost, the immediate ability to drop it into the system we have at the moment without changing the vehicles or the infrastructure, and because of the environmental impact with the potential saving from HVO compared to diesel.
And finally, waste has a value. So have we considered, Andy knows my thoughts on this, have we considered an anaerobic digester for our own kitchen waste collection? Because that would work out at something like 120 kilowatt system.
So Hampshire is the waste disposal authority for our waste. So we need to take it to Hampshire. Hampshire are currently of the view there is enough commercial capacity in Hampshire to deal with this, but it may turn out that actually there are options for partners in Hampshire to work together to provide some infrastructure, but that's not been progressed far yet, but there are authorities looking at that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Pett? Sorry, one
Thank you,
moment.
Chair.
Councillor Cutler
Sorry.
just wanted to step in with a comment on that. Sorry, Councillor Pett.
And I think in terms of the sort of AD side of things, if there is capacity there, expecting Hampshire County Council to do more on AD at the moment and joint ventures on anaerobic digestion when they can't take a decision on the tubs and waste tray. I think it's important for us that we just push them to get on with that aspect of it and not commit themselves to thinking about other aspects of disposal, because the delay we have with
Councillor Cutler, it's not the night to be political. We have to stick
I'm not
to
being
what's on the
political about it.
agenda.
I'm saying the delay is because Hampshire haven't taken the decision, and that's not that is a decision that they need to take, and it is the you know, that's the important thing that we need the decision taken on rather than bringing more things into the mix. That was my point.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked about the AD is because we've got enough to have a 125 kilowatt system from the food waste, and then we know that we've got a problem with the grass cutting and how we dispose of that, which could all be taken care of at the same time.
Councillor Pett, please.
Thank you, Chair, and excuse me. Thank you, Campbell, for the presentation, which was all very clear. I balked a little at one figure that you put up early on, which was that a third of household residual waste is food waste, because that seemed an incredibly large amount to me. And then we went on to slide 9, and there is an array of 5 items there, which in my household, and I would have thought in many households, would all go into the compost bin. And I just wonder, you know, I realise not everybody can compost things at all, but you know, in a rural ward like mine, I think most people would compost things. I wonder if we really got the numbers right in terms of, or should we not be encouraging more people to avoid this service by composting at home and removing the need for some of this? Because certainly, as I say, I'm just find that extraordinary that a third of all waste is food waste.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to say is it's a government requirement that we collect this from all households. But you are right, it's really surprising how much residual waste is food waste. Our waste and all the other waste in Hampshire gets taken to transfer stations where it is bulked up. Some of it, however, is taken to a facility at the Alton Material Recycling Facility, where it goes into basically a garage at the back of it and goes on a conveyor belt, and people count how much of each type of waste is in there. So I get a spreadsheet once a month, which is interesting reading if you're interested in that sort of thing, which I am. That is how much food waste there is. It is really surprising. Not everyone does have a garden, and you can see differences between rounds in terms of where participation will be. I think one of the really interesting things is we've got to build the system to cope with things like Christmas and bank holidays, where people produce more food waste. And we don't really know how much people are going to produce. So what does happen from historical evidence on other authorities is people get these, they fill them up in week 1, they take it out and they go, oh, that's a lot of money I've wasted. And weeks 2, 3, 4, they start producing less food waste because that's the ideal. But actually, what tends to happen is places like Winchester, which are relatively affluent, have quite high participation, but that will vary across the district. But you're right, a lot of people have compost heaps. I've got a compost heap, but actually there's still quite a lot of food that can't go on the compost heap. So bread, those sorts of things can't go on the compost heap. So it is really interesting that there's a lot of food and there's so much food waste. You're right, it's really surprising.
I just fear there's a potential unintended consequence of this, that without a sort of parallel educational nudge program to encourage more people to compost as well, we'll end up with a lot of us becoming lazier and creating more CO2 by using this service far more than we need to.
Sorry, I left my thing on, but yeah, I think the advantage we have with this, and also the disadvantage, is this is going to happen across the whole country at the same time. So if you live in Winchester and you go on holiday to Essex or vice versa, you'll see the same system with the same symbols and the same everything else. So it is going to happen. Now that will mean there'll be national government adverts and communications about this, which might have a different impact from our communications. And what's really important with all this, and comes back to something that Councillor Horrell said, is we did an engagement earlier which was really successful. We need to build on that, so we engage people about how to really use this properly, how to get pots, tubs and trays in the system when we do it, so that effectively the easy bit is giving people a bin. The difficult bit is getting people to use it properly and to the fullest of their ability.
We do intend obviously to do a lot of communications with this, and we're looking at resources at the moment in terms of what we might need to have a sustained communication program, because as Campbell says, this changes over time. So we need to sustain it. We need to work with people living in flats, for example, to get this change through. So the 3 R's, we really need to push those to make sure that we get the best outcome from this. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Communications is really important, and we will build that into our resource requirements, which we'll bring forward in the autumn.
Councillor Cuntley, you wanted to come in here.
Yeah, I mean, there's just one very specific thing which actually hasn't been raised, I don't think, in any of our discussions so far, but in a previous life where I was involved with animal health, composting meat products is a really bad idea. You know, they must go into anaerobic digesters or in other form of disposal. So waste animal products should go in the waste bin, whatever happens, even if you're composting your peelings and your salad waste and that sort of side of things. So, you know, it's still necessary even in the rural areas.
Yeah, rest assured, I don't try composting.
Thank you. Councillor Atchell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Campbell, for the presentation. I'm going to try not to make this political, but I do have a question to ask. What if the government changes? Is this funding set in stone? Or we still get the funding?
So I can't comment on if the government changes or not, but what's been happening over the last 3 or 4 years following the publication of the Environment Act is that all these things, the simpler recycling, which includes food waste, the extended producer responsibility and the deposit return scheme, are all things which all political parties and all the main producers are comfortable with. So whilst I can't guarantee this, at the moment it appears that this has got political buy-in across the political spectrum. That's not saying it will operate exactly the same as it might do in all sorts of different scenarios, but actually at a high level there's a lot of political buy-in to this. And in terms of the funding which we're going to get, we don't necessarily know how much we're going to get, so it can't change because we don't know how much we're going to get, but there is an understanding that food waste will be covered by the New Burdens programme, and we're likely to be told about the transitional funding which we're going to get up to the start of April 2026, which will enable communications and project management and those sorts of things, and the ongoing revenue funding from the 1st of April 2026. We're likely to get told about that. The schedule is sort of the end of this year, the start of next year, so they can get built into the budget programmes. So I don't know if it will change, but we haven't heard about it yet. But the anticipation is we'll get funding, and we're planning on that basis.
Councillor Batho.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Campbell, for the presentation. I was just interested that you mentioned on slide 3 that the food waste collection will be done alongside existing collections. Obviously, it's being done by a second vehicle, and that will potentially have increased vehicle movements in rural neighbourhoods. If it's also being done alongside, I'm assuming that those food waste trucks are doing the same rounds and routes as the larger trucks, and therefore how are we having only 9 of those and we've got 17 of the larger ones? So I'm just wondering how you can square the alongside and the actual numbers of trucks of both varieties. Thank you.
Yeah, so we will be operating this on the same routes with different vehicles. So if you put your bin out on a Monday, you'll put your food waste bin out on a Monday alongside it. So we have got 17 vehicles which are electric, so refuse collection vehicles. So we've got 5 residual vehicles which pick up all the black bins. In another part of the district, we've got 5 recycling vehicles which pick up the recycling from that half of the district, and they swap round the other week. We've got 3 garden waste vehicles. We've got 2 glass vehicles who cover the whole of Winchester on a 4 weekly basis, and we've got 2 narrow access vehicles which are slightly smaller and do the sort of nooks and crannies of Winchester and Alresford where the big vehicles can't get through. So what will happen is, because participation rate, which is expected of these things, based on what other people do, is lower than the residual waste bin and the recycling waste bin, which operate at about 95%. Most people put their bin out every week. With these, it's 70–80%. So whilst you put your bin out, it's not necessarily and you don't notice a difference. The vehicle might be doing a bigger round than the residual round, which your bin gets picked up on. So that's how I sort of square that circle. And this is why it's quite complex in terms of ordering vehicles, because if the participation rate goes up or down, or the amount of kilograms of food waste you collect per household goes up or down, the service needs to flex to accommodate that. And that's why we're helpful to have BIFA's expertise on how to do this to manage the service. But it's a really good question, and it's one which is quite difficult to explain. So hopefully that's answered it.
Councillor Wallace.
Thank you. Really pleased that you looked into different options for the collection vehicles. So thank you for doing that. One of the reasons you say for not proposing electric vehicles is that the infrastructure is not in place. Now we've known about this. We've known about the plan to collect food waste for many years now, and we've had a great opportunity to get infrastructure in place during that time, but we haven't. So I think I'm going to be back. Why? I mean, I guess there's kind of two elements to that. Why haven't we put it in so far, and what makes us think we'll be able to develop it over the coming years? That's my first question. I do have another one, but go with that one first.
We can probably answer this one between us. We've had lots of discussions with the energy supplier, and there are several different suppliers as well. It's quite confusing, but we've appointed some experts to try and help us with this. So there's an infrastructure issue which is overcomable if you spend the money. But there is also a supply issue which we can't overcome. That's not within our own remit, if you like. The energy companies, SSE, have to increase the supply into the area, so that's not within our own control. Unfortunately, we can't deliver that. But we are looking at how we might be able to secure additional supply in the future. We're waiting for them to come back to us with some costings for that, and it's a complicated process, and they don't guarantee, even if you reserve it, that they'll keep it for you. If someone else comes along and wants it now, then they'll take it and they'll sell it to them. So that's the way it works. It's tricky, but we are trying our best to future-proof this and work out how we can do that. I think Councillor Lerny mentioned earlier that Stagecoach are also looking to secure the same additional supply, and we want to work with them because that's part of our fleet as well in terms of the park and ride buses in the future. So it is complicated, and we will be able to come to some conclusions hopefully by the autumn and put that forward in the autumn paper in terms of how we might be able to go forward on that aspect.
Okay, I'll look forward to hearing that in the autumn. I did have a second question, and really kind of goes to this. So there's very little costings or finance material shown in this information. I normally expect to see a business plan, a business case for this, not just the upfront cost, but kind of the recurring costs, the maintenance, the operation, the length of the contract, how it's paid back over time, a proper costed business case. And that's what I would expect to be signing off on, both here and at Cabinet, because I don't know how you sign off on the vehicles without understanding the entire business case. But we don't seem to have that.
So we are still working on all of that, and that will be in the Cabinet paper. And we have had expert consultants helping us do all that due diligence, look at the type of vehicles, all of the things that you mentioned, the running costs, the lifetimes of the vehicles, the fuel, maintenance, insurance, all of that we have looked at, and that's all behind the recommendations that we're making, and that will all be set out in the Cabinet paper once that's finished.
If I might add to that, Chair, I think it's worth saying that yes, we are we have been working on the business case, and certainly we've seen draft business cases already. But at the end of the day, this is a statutory duty. So in a way, the business case, while it will evaluate the choices we make, we still at the end of the day have to go ahead and do this.
Thank you. I just had one final question, if I may. So on slide number 4, you talked about the saving of the 1,900 tonnes of CO2 equivalent per year. I just wondered what the basis for that is, because of course then you've talked about the CO2 emissions per tonnage of the HVO lorries. There will be a CO2 equivalent of the production of those. And I have a real bugbear at the moment about solar panels and electric vehicles and how we are actually trashing the planet by saying they're great for the environment without looking at the unintended consequences. So I just wondered in real terms what that number might actually be.
Should know by now. We've got 1,900 tonnes in there as a carbon equivalent. So that is a best guess and estimate of what that would be, which is worked out on. So at the moment, our food waste is collected, and it goes off and is incinerated, and doesn't get reused. And then once it's incinerated, some of it disappears off, and some of it becomes ash, which goes away, and is disposed of in landfill. So the main where that's come from is based on the work we did with the consultants we worked with to do some of the modelling which we did, which based on the figures which they've used previously elsewhere, you end up with less food waste going to incineration, and it's becoming an energy source which you can get energy from to heat houses and do all sorts of other bits and pieces and become a soil improver. So that's where that comes from, and because it's so much food waste, as Councillor Pett mentioned here, that the third of waste is food waste. It's such a high tonnage of that. We're actually saving quite a lot by removing it from incineration, which is effectively you're not disposing of it, you're reusing it and recycling it effectively into another product, and that's where that saving comes in. And it's quite a long, convoluted calculation, but that's effectively where that is.
So we might even have an outside chance of reducing the amount. We have the larger lorries that go around more frequently, and if we're removing potentially, okay, not everyone will engage, so maybe a quarter rather than a third, maybe we might be able to reduce the number of lorries that are needed.
Potentially, yes. I think that's one of the things we don't know, but potentially in the long term, if some of that food waste is reduced, it will reduce some of the space in the residual bins, which might mean we don't need to collect so much. And that it also goes for the deposit return scheme, which is going to come in, which should see plastic bottles and tin cans be removed from the recycling, which is also quite a bulky space which that takes up. And you're absolutely right, that might see less residual waste vehicles or less recycling vehicles needed.
Thank you. Does anybody have, Councillor Bolton?
Campbell, thanks. Just to follow up on Malcolm's question about the sort of business case and all that sort of thing, are you able to give me any idea of how much we expect funding to come from central government and how much we expect we'll have to find of the 1.3? Thank you.
So yeah, that's set out in the cabinet report. So at the moment, we've been given an indicative figure by the government of £1.3 million in terms of capital funding to roll out food waste, which includes the cost of kitchen caddies, the curbside bins, vehicles, and the communal wheeled bins that we'll need. We don't think that's quite enough, as in common with a number of authorities. So we've appealed that and are waiting on a response from DEFRA. on that. But what's in the cabinet report is what we know at the moment. But we have appealed that. The other thing we don't know is how much the ongoing revenue funding will be, or what the transitional funding will be. So as Councillor Lerny pointed out, this is a mandatory duty we need to do, so we need to do it. And it's a new burden and we'll get some money for it. But we don't know how much that is yet, which does make budgeting slightly difficult, but we have got some figures in the budget which assume the government will pay for 80% of the revenue cost of this. See, Councillor.
Councillor Cutler, you wanted to speak?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that you might recall that in the budget last year, we very specifically said we didn't feel that we would get 100%, and so therefore we budgeted a figure to cover 20% of the cost that we would have to pay, and so that is budgeted for. We obviously will want to go back and appeal and get as much as we can from government, and that 80% was a guesstimate at the time. You know, it was just an estimate of what was likely to happen, and so we have got it covered in the budget.
Thank you. Do we have any final questions before we go to debate? No? Okay, do we have any debate on this presentation that we'd like to? Councillor Clue?
Thank you, Chair. I think obviously we need to act in a more sustainable and resource efficient way where possible. And to me this evening, it's obvious we do not have the perfect solution at the present time, but it's very apparent that this is a difficult project. And I thank you, Campbell and Andy, because I think you've answered all the questions fired at you remarkably well. And I personally feel that we cannot wait. We just can't sit and wait. We need to go ahead. So I'm just going to say, let's get going and set this in motion. Thank you.
Councillor Wallace?
I think I agree with most of what Councillor Clear just said. I think I just wanted, but I am struggling to understand what recommendation this committee can make at this time. Without the business case, I don't know how this committee can recommend going forward with this plan. I think, I understand the intentions are all good and everybody's it's been great to have answers, but without actually having the business case in front of us, I think it could be misinterpreted how much this committee can back the plan, if that makes sense. So I think that we just need to think about that in how we feed back to Cabinet.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. I just wanted to sum up and say thank you both for coming along this evening, and to Councillor Lerny and Councillor Cutler for your engagement on this. I think it was really important that Scrutiny got to look at this, even though we weren't able to look at the paper itself. So thank you for that. I have one recommendation to Cabinet that I've written down, which is to consider education programmes alongside this to encourage composting and reduction of food waste in general. So we have got a recommendation, Councillor Wallace. I think even if we had the business case in front of us, as Councillor Lerny said, the business case is more around, it's not the business case for doing this, business case for the acquisition of the vehicles, part of which will be funded. So actually it's more about understanding what we're doing, how we're doing going forwards. Are we happy with the direction of travel and looking at the future? So the strategy behind the business case, really. So thank you, and you are free. So we will just give them a moment to pack away and leave the room. We will come on to appointments of external bodies related to scrutiny. Councillor Horrell, you were down to speak on this, but are you happy for me to pick this up, or did you still want to come forwards?
Chair, I've made some recommendations to you. I'm happy for you to present those to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Horrell. Thank you, Mr Hendy. I didn't thank you for coming along and supporting us either. Okay, so we'll come on to the appointment of external bodies. So first of all, we have the Portsmouth City Council Health and Overview Scrutiny Panel. We have one vacancy and one deputy. Does anybody have any nominations for this? Councillor Reach.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose, I would like to send both together. Same as last year, Councillor Vivian Atchwell with a deputy of Councillor Jonathan Williams.
Thank you. I just want to confirm that both of your nominations are in the Portsmouth Hospitals area because that's a requirement from this policy.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. My understanding from last year's discussion with Councillor Todd was that he would try harder this year to make sure that was the case because he was aware that he'd got it wrong last year. Hence me trying to clarify matters. Unfortunately, Councillor Todd's not here to speak out. I wanted to nominate Councillor Paula Langford Smith for this. Who's your seconder, Councillor Reach? Councillor Clear. My seconder is Councillor Bolton. Do we have any other nominations for this? No. Okay, let's vote then. So for Councillor Atchwell for the main vacancy, please show. Okay, and for Councillor Bolton for the main vacancy. Okay, right. And for Councillor Williams as the deputy. For Councillor Bolton as deputy. Right. We've used politics again. Thank you. Right. Centre of Governance and Scrutiny, South East Regional Networks. That goes to me. If everybody's happy with that going to me, I have to say we haven't met as yet. Partnership for South Hampshire. So for this one, we have one vacancy and one deputy. So I would like to nominate Caroline Horrell for either one or either of the roles. What other nominations do we have in the room? Councillor Reach.
Thank you. I would like to nominate the same people who were there last year, which would be a continuation. So we would have Councillor Sudhakar Atchwell with a deputy of Councillor James Batho, who's with us this evening. Thank you.
Okay, so those for Councillor Atchwell for the main vacancy, please show. Those for Councillor Horrell. Those for apologies. Who did you say for deputy? Batho.
Councillor Batho.
Councillor Batho, you're in the room. And I did note that. I just had my brain went. Those for Councillor Batho as deputy, and those for Councillor Horrell as deputy. Councillor Batho it is. Thank you for those. Coming on to item 10 of the agenda, we have the annual scrutiny report. Councillor Lee, I believe you wanted to speak on this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Some brief comments, which I think you wanted at scrutiny. I took a quick look at the economy and housing purpose, making the district a premier business location, which of course is very laudable. But I did note conversations about bids and city focused items throughout the year. So I just wonder whether the absence of a helping hand or support process for the rural district areas might be worthy of mention and observation. And also I wonder, given conversations about cultural strategy and what that means for business, both in the city and district, might it be also worth linking that need to the cultural strategy? It's just an observation. on the HEP, we seem to be, and rightly so, over focused on mitigation when runaway climate temperatures with more extreme weather is evident, heat and rainfall with flooding, which we've all experienced. But I just wonder whether there's a need to focus on adaptation as well. Now, I know this is backward looking rather than forward looking, but I think scrutiny may wish to consider that and wonder whether that's worthy of comment and in the report. I then looked at the community safety partnership issues, and reflecting back on the last minutes of the last meeting, I just wanted to ask, can I ask, where will be the actionable, or the actions be captured and then followed through for the concerns and questions raised, particularly at the last Scrutiny Committee meeting, which I personally raised, about the closure of the landlines by the end of this year? Residents' anxieties still need addressing. So can I ask for that to be considered? And then on page 27 on housing, it states needs to be carbon neutral by 2030. Throughout the year, I'm sure I've heard correctly, and I certainly raised questions about embodied carbon. So I wonder whether that statement needs qualification. Carbon neutral, operational embodied carbon, I would suggest. And that would chime with the way forward for the carbon neutrality action plan and also with the nature emergency. And then finally, there's references made to the carbon credit trading in the report, I think same page 27, but it's not clear on what the way forward is. Is this initiative being taken forward or not? It's just left hanging there. I'm not clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. In response to that, many of the recommendations, they go through to Cabinet to be considered. So whether they're being taken forward or not, that's the path it goes to. So it's then for Cabinet to decide whether they take up the recommendations or not. So that's where to follow that up. With regard to the landlines, I'm glad you raised that, because we did discuss that at that meeting, and I know that Corinne Bishop agreed to take that away as something to consider. So yes, it will absolutely be worthwhile us following that up with her and maybe re-raising it with the Community Safety Partnership. So thank you for your comments. Do we have any other questions on the annual scrutiny report? No. Any debate? No. I would just like to thank for the members in the room who were part of that last year. Thank you for all of your, be that on either of the policy committees or on scrutiny itself. Thank you for your inputs over the past year, and it's been a pleasure chairing this, and will be for the coming year. So and thank you to Mr. Watson for his contribution and for keeping us all in line and reporting back so wonderfully. Councillor Reach.
Thank you. Could I just thank Councillor Horrell as well, who is still in the room, because she was a very enthusiastic and well-researched member of the committee last year.
Thank you, Councillor Reach. Absolutely. And who chaired the performance panel so wonderfully and always brought us those thorough reporting back. So yes, absolutely. Recorded thanks to Councillor Hall. Okay, moving on to item 11, the annual report exceptions to forward plan. Do we have any questions on this paper? No. Any debate? Councillor Wallace.
Just wanted to say well done. I think there was only one exception in the past year, so that's my thank you and well done to the officers for that.
Thank you. Okay, wonderful. Then we shall move on to note the latest forward plan of key decisions. Has everybody had a chance to look at this? And we have, it's the period July to September 2024 that was issued to the committee on the 31st of May, and we also have a hard copy on the table. Is everybody happy to note that? Yeah, okay. Coming on to the draft work programme, I know I promised after our training that we would have a call between us to discuss some of the topics we might like to bring forwards to our draft work programme. We haven't done that because, of course, this was we didn't know if it was going to happen, if it was going to be necessary. So we will be doing that before our next scrutiny meeting. So I will be liaising with Mr. Watson on arranging that so we can look at how to take that forwards. So for now, are we happy to note the draft work programme, understanding that we haven't added to it yet? Councillor Wallace?
Yeah, I was just going to say, can we add to that? Great, we've got that plan in place. I think there's a little bit of work around defining exactly what those types of finished groups are to do, not just subject, but also their kind of terms of reference. So how many people are on the group? You know, how many offers, how much offers involvement? Is it just covering scrutiny, or is it covering business and HEP as well? And how many groups and so on, frequency? So I think that we need to consider that as well.
With regards to the task and finished groups, it's just from scrutiny. It's not from the policy groups. It typically is between 3 and 5 people, but typically on the project it would be 3 people on there. So a smaller group made up of us who are on the overall scrutiny committee. And how many officers and how much is involved depends entirely on the subject. So, for example, when we did the mental health one, there were several officers involved and we had 3 separate hour-long sessions with them because there were 3 different areas to look at with regard to the mental health. There was the internal, how we were looking after the mental health of our staff, then how we were looking after the mental health of our housing tenants, and then wider what we were doing to contribute towards positive mental health for people within the district. So that's why there were 3 separate things. So how much is involved and how much time we need and how many officers are involved will depend entirely on the topic, and we'll figure that out between us and with the help of Mrs. Taylor, who will help to guide that as well. We sort of work it out amongst us as to what we think is needed, and we will be guided by Laura Taylor on what will be needed. And actually afterwards, when officers have gone off and gone, so for example on the mental health, it was something I was really keen they looked at, but then they came back and we've got these 3 key areas we think are important. Are you happy with those? Yes, we are. And then it moved forward. So it's sort of evolves itself depending on what specifically we want looked at. Councillor Bolton?
Because I'm new to scrutiny, how do we add task and finish groups to this? If we're we've come new to scrutiny and we've got our little bugbears of things, I'm thinking, Jerry and I might be interested in a fly tipping task and finish or things like that, because of the big issues in the countryside. How do we nudge those into the picture?
So for me, in my mind, and this will be a group discussion, it's the things that are most important to our residents. And that to me is how we should best prioritise that. Or if there is something specifically failing our residents, then that should be our priority. But Ms. Taylor, can you?
Well, Chair, exactly that. We have a process in place already. If you wanted a paper to come to committee, you need to do a work plan request. And at that point, then you request something on X or Y, and then that's assessed for resourcing, and then the committee decides whether it wants that paper. So that's a formal piece to put something on this agenda. That's available to all of the scrutiny committees. But
isn't that available to all councillors?
Yes, absolutely.
Rather than just
absolutely.
Yes. But then scrutiny members decide.
But the task and finish groups, as you so well described, Chair, are really agile and flexible. And as we heard at the training, it's just an hour. You might just want to do a quick deep dive on something, but as we shared, and as I'm sure as Councillor Brooke will facilitate the question, it needs to be the most valuable thing for our residents, because then there is a short paper, which then just might be a series of bullet points or comments, and it might not report back until the next meeting. So it's a really flexible way of working, which those of you that were at the briefing, I think you would agree that is what our colleague Camilla was advocating, that it's kind of like
you don't have to follow a set format in these committees, but we need to be mindful that we're doing the best we can for our residents with the resources we have. So, and you might be able to explore some of that. As you say, you're talking about fly tipping, then at the next quarterly report, you could go, can we just have an hour on this? And, you know, but as we said at the time, we can do an hour on that. We can't do 10 hours. we can't do an hour on everything. So it's like, so it's the priority, as Councillor Brooks saying. Thank you. Thank you. So are we happy to note, notwithstanding these comments, the draft work programme for 24-25, acknowledging that it will increase? Many thanks. And then just to note finally, item 14, to note the date and time of future meetings of the committee. So we've got 29th July, September 2024, November, February 2025, it feels so far away, but it's going to be here in a heartbeat, and March 2025, which again will be our lovely Community Safety Partnership meeting. Thank you all for your engagement this evening. Thank you for coming along. It is an unusual scenario that we have this during the run up to an election, so thank you for your engagement. Have a lovely evening. Good night.